video games.
Emulation is a major way of playing video games on discontinued consoles, companies, or games in general, because most games don't get ported or remakes when it comes to older consoles like the PS2 and before. But recently, a website that I'm going to be referring to as VL, if you understand what it is standing for, has been losing a lot of games by apparently EA, Sega, Lego, and Nintendo. Although a lot of people speculate that these are just a bunch of trolls, these games are now gone forever on one of the biggest emulation places to get games from. Now, mind you, not everyone knows how to back up ROMs onto an SD card and then put it into a computer and whatnot. So a lot of people go to websites like this as long as they legally own the game. But yes, piracy is still a big problem, but recently, emulation has been dying, and I want to take a look at what started this all, because a lot of my favorite emulators are now disappearing off of the face of the earth. The first major documented emulator was back in 1996, which is now known as SNES 9X. Another major emulator that was released in the 90s was Ultra HLE, which was released for the N64 back in 1999, right before the GameCube came out, which did spark a little bit of legal trouble. Ultra HLE did lower sales of the N64, which led to Nintendo to take a stance against emulators. After multiple legal battles with different emulators, the courts would always rule in favor of the emulators because, hey, they're not stealing anything. So, this caused Nintendo to have a hatred for emulators, even though they created the Virtual Console, which was basically just emulating on stuff like the Wii, Wii U, and 3DS. But with the courts ruling in favors of the emulators, a new problem arose with emulation websites. These sites had a bunch of ROMs on them and labeled themselves as a place to get ROMs for emulation, which technically these were places for Piracy Hub, but because the court had ruled in emulators' favor, they believed they were safe. But not all of these places were just ROM dumps. Some of them had translations, fan games, homebrews, and games from other countries, so people inside the US could play games from other countries or have a translated version if they only spoke English. This also allowed for stuff like ROM hacks and homebrewing, which ROM hacks were basically just modded source code of a game to turn it into whatever you wanted, and homebrews were just people making whatever they wanted, could be found on these sites as well, labeled under NES and other systems because they actually ran on NES code. And like I mentioned earlier, emulation is so useful that even Nintendo did it for their Virtual Console. I mean, look at all the games on Wii, Wii U, and 3DS, back when the services were still up. These games actually were the original game source code running on a built-in emulator. Ah, Nintendo, our favorite bipolar company. If it wasn't for the early years of emulation, we wouldn't have stuff like Yuzu, Drastic, Pizza Boy, Aether XS, and a bunch others that we still use today. But in recent years, we've been having a lot of problems with emulation websites and emulators being stricken down, and I want to talk about the downfall of it and what's been happening. Back in 2020, emulation started to thrive a lot more, but in the past 2 years, emulation has started to fall. One of the more noteworthy things to happen was the end of Aether XS2, which was a PS2 emulator on mobile devices. The creator of it was receiving death threats. This absolutely baffles me, because people part of the emulation community should be happy they can play PS2 on the go instead of being stuck at their computers. And yes, while I know most laptops are able to run PS2 games now these days, not everyone has a laptop, but almost everyone has a mobile phone. So for Aether XS to shut down because of the fact that people were sending death threats is so stupid. And even though Aether XS2 wasn't taken down by a major company, it still sucks that people can still take down emulation even if they aren't like a major company from stuff like death threats and other things. But if we're talking about companies taking stuff down, it's notable for Dolphin getting taken down off of Steam by Nintendo. Nintendo was able to get Dolphin banned from Steam, so you would just have to go and get Dolphin the regular way. And Dolphin being put on Steam was a big step forward for the emulation community, making it way easier to download a legit app. But due to Steam being made to combat piracy, putting Dolphin Emulator kind of goes against the whole moral values, considering the fact that emulators can be used for piracy, but are legally safe because of the fact that they don't use source code or anything like that. No, what I'm saying does not mean that Dolphin Emulator is used exclusively for piracy. Me and my friends have a bunch of backups on my computer so I can play Wii games anytime I want without having to put the disc in my Wii. I mainly use my Wii for GameCube games anyways. Here's a photo of my Wii and some of the games in my collection. But back on topic, let's talk about another Nintendo emulator that got taken down. Yuzu recently got taken down because of the fact that to make a Switch emulator, you actually have to use the original source code because there's no way to backwards engineer it like other emulators we use today. That's considering the fact that the Nintendo Switch is hard to jailbreak, and secondly, the fact that the Nintendo Switch is still a new console. And not a lot of people know this, but you can actually copyright codes for stuff like consoles and video games. So did Nintendo have full right to take down Yuzu? I actually don't have an opinion on that, that's what you're gonna have to figure out for yourself. But it sucks that Yuzu actually got taken down. After the scare with Yuzu being taken down, a lot of emulators started to disappear. And in fact, Aether XS2, which I listed earlier, was removed from the Google Play Store, and people speculate that the creator of it removed it due to the Yuzu takedown. The fact that one emulator being taken down can cause a lot of more emulators to either shut down the process of being made or completely delist them sucks. But in my opinion, that was just the beginning of the fall, as now websites are being taken down as well. Creditable websites that have been legally operating for years are now being taken down, and it starts with VL. And these websites help archive games that will inevitably stop existing, like SNES cartridges succumbing to cartridge rot, or GBA cartridges no longer having their save battery working, or discs getting too scratched up to be used. And yes, I know that we can combat these by taking care of our cartridges, replacing the batteries in GBA games, and using disk resurfacers. Physical media is limited. There is only a certain amount of PS2, GBA, and SNES games that exist in the world. And not everyone is willing to sell their old PS2 games, or they just completely forget about them and leave them in the attic, and they never get sold or bought by anyone who's actually looking for that game. And that's why I want to talk about these websites and why they're important. No, I am not condoning piracy, but I'm saying why these websites are important if they operate legally. ROM websites like VL are important for the simple fact that not every media will be here forever, considering that discs can get scratched up, cartridges can succumb to cartridge rot, and batteries for save data can completely die out or, acid. What I'm simply saying is that these old physical medias can be destroyed or get damaged, meaning they won't work properly anymore or work at all. Even if the battery dies in a Game Boy game, you can still play it, but what happens if cartridge rot starts happening to Game Boy games? Well, then they disappear forever. And what sucks is the fact that a lot of these games won't get remakes, considering the fact that the company either went under, stopped producing that IP, sold it off, or anything else that can cause a game to just never get a remake. ROM sites are important because they work as mini archives for games that we might not ever get to see again. But when a game does get a remake, in my opinion, I think you should actually buy the remake instead of going to one of these ROM sites and just downloading the game. And hear me out. If a company took time to port a game, remake it, or remaster it in any shape or form, you should support the creators by buying the new remake instead of just going to a ROM site and getting the old one. When I get the money, I'm 100% going to pick up Super Mario RPG for the Switch, but originally, before the remake came out, I used to just play it using SNES 9X. And besides, most of the time, it's just easier to buy a remake instead of going to one of these sites. Essentially, what I'm saying is that these websites are useful because most games won't get a remake or remaster, and if they do, to just buy the remake or remaster instead of using these sites to avoid piracy. It's really simple logic that with someone with just a quarter of a brain can understand. With VL and a bunch of emulators being taken down, it really sucks to see that this hobby might go out of fashion one day. Emulation is a great way of playing games for a lot of people who don't own consoles. You can just buy the game, back up the ROMs, and play it on a computer just like that. But of course, Nintendo will always have a hatred for emulators and will always try their best to take them down, including ROM sites as well. My introduction to the original GameCube Animal Crossing was buying it before I had a Wii and then backing it up onto a computer and playing it like at a Starbucks. I'm not even joking. I would take my laptop around and I would play the Animal Crossing GameCube edition anywhere I could. Through emulation, I was able to fall in love with these old games that I have a connection to now. But with Lego, EA, Sega, and Nintendo taking down VL, what do we do now? Well, there's not much to do, considering these games are now gone off of that site. All we can do now is hope that this website will be able to get those games back up, or learn how to dump our own games onto a computer. I don't want to end this video on a sad note, though. We will always find a way to play these games if we're not smart enough how to dump save data onto a computer. But, you know, it's never too late to start trying. Even if it is too hard for us to dump save data onto a computer, or to find a new website if these games don't come back online, let's not be sad that it's gone, but be happy that we were able to discover our favorite games through emulation. I will always cherish what I was able to do with emulation, enabling to find a community that I'm accepted in and have a lot of fun being a part of. But other than that, let's not be sad that VL is gone. Let's be happy that we were able to create new memories with it and cherish what it gave us. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been Dylan, and I hope you guys have a great day, night, afternoon, evening, whatever time of the day it is.